She walked through the gate with a limp. Within minutes, she was rejected. Too injured, they said. Not fit for duty. The security guards smirked as they escorted her off the base. She drove away humiliated, believing her career with military medicine was over. Then, 16 minutes later, 4 Black Hawk helicopters descended on the base without clearance, demanding immediate access. They were looking for someone, a combat medic. Call sign, Widowmaker 1. And nobody on that base understood what they had just done. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing. The helicopters landed, armed operators exited, and the same personnel who turned her away were about to learn exactly who she was. The sedan pulled up to the main gate of Fort Meridian just before 9 in the morning. The sun had already burned off the early haze, leaving the desert air sharp and dry. Bryn Harlow cut the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the checkpoint ahead. Armed personnel, concrete barriers, the unmistakable weight of military protocol hanging in the air like static before a storm. She reached for her medical deployment bag on the passenger seat and stepped out of the car. The moment her left foot touched the ground, the unevenness in her gait became visible. Her right leg moved smoothly. Her left dragged just slightly, compensating for something deeper. The limp was pronounced, unavoidable. It had been with her for 7 years, and she had long since stopped trying to hide it. She walked toward the gate. 2 personnel stood behind the barrier. The younger one, Airman Rashi, looked barely old enough to be out of training. The other, Sergeant Howell, had the hard eyes of someone who had seen enough to form opinions quickly. Both watched her approach. Both noticed the limp immediately. Bryn stopped at the window and pulled out her identification. Howell took it without a word. His eyes scanned. The card, then flicked up to her face, then down to her leg. The motion was quick, but she caught it. She always caught it. Temporary medical contractor, she said. Medical Unit 7. My assignment paperwork was filed 3 weeks ago. Howell turned the ID over in his hand, studying it far longer than necessary. Rosh shifted his weight, glancing between them. Howell's expression was unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. You're reporting for active duty rotation, Howell said. It was not quite a question. Bryn kept her voice even. Temporary medical support. Everything should be in the system. Howell handed the ID to Roshi and stepped back toward the booth. He picked up a phone, his back turned to her. She could not hear what he said, but she saw the way his shoulders tensed, the way his hand gestured once, sharply. Roche avoided her eyes. A truck passed through the adjacent lane without delay. The driver waved. The gate lifted. Business as usual. But Bryn was still standing. There. Howell returned and gestured toward a waiting area just inside the gate. You need to wait here, he said. Medical admin is being notified. Bryn nodded and moved to the side. She set her bag down and stood with her hands loosely at her sides. She did not sit. She had learned long ago that sitting made the limp more obvious when she stood again. Better to stay upright. Better to control what they saw. Minutes passed. Personnel came and went. Some glanced at her. Most did not. Howell made another call, then another. Rosh kept his distance, occasionally looking her way and then quickly looking elsewhere. The sun climbed higher. Bryn's leg began to ache, a low throb that lived in the bone. She ignored it. She had ignored worse. A vehicle pulled up from inside the base. A lieutenant stepped out. Caswell. His uniform was crisp, his posture stiff. He exchanged a few words with Howell, who pointed toward Bryn. Caswell turned and looked at her for the first time. His gaze dropped to her leg almost immediately. Ms. Harlow, he said, come with me. She picked up her bag and followed him to the vehicle. He did not offer to help with her bag. He did not open the door for her. He simply waited, arms crossed, as she loaded herself in. The drive through the base was silent. Caswell stared straight ahead. Bryn watched the buildings pass. Motor pool, barracks, training facilities. Everything clean, everything ordered, everything exactly as it should be. They stopped outside the medical administration building. Caswell got out and walked toward the entrance without waiting. Bryn followed. The limp was more visible now. The ache had deepened. She kept her face neutral. Inside, the building smelled like disinfectant and paperwork. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Caswell led her down a corridor and stopped outside an office. He knocked once and opened the door without waiting for a response. The contractor, he said. Major Felicia Drummond sat behind a desk, eyes fixed on a tablet in front of her. She was in her late 40s, hair pulled back tightly, posture immaculate. She did not look up. "Have a seat, Ms. Harlow." Bryn sat. Caswell remained standing near the door, arms still crossed. Drummond scrolled through the tablet with one finger, her expression unchanging. The silence stretched. Bryn folded her hands in her lap and waited. Finally, Drummond looked up. "Your medical clearance is recent." 16 days, Bryn said. "Everything should be current." Drummond's eyes moved downward, settling on Bryn's left leg. The Major's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Walk to the door and back," Drummond said. Bryn blinked. "Excuse me." Drummond's tone sharpened. "I need to assess your mobility for field conditions. Now please." The room went very still. Caswell shifted his weight slightly, watching. Bryn held Drummond's gaze for a long moment, then stood. She walked to the door, turned, walked back. The limp was undeniable, every step uneven, every step a reminder of something she carried. She sat back down. Drummond was already typing something into her tablet. "The incoming unit operates under demanding circumstances," Drummond said. "I am not convinced you are suited for deployment conditions." Bryn kept her voice measured. "My clearance specifically addresses mobility parameters. I have worked with special operations units before." Caswell leaned forward slightly. "When? And with which units?" Bryn paused. "That information is classified." Caswell scoffed. "How convenient." Drummond closed the tablet with a soft click. "I am putting your assignment under medical review. Lieutenant Caswell will escort you to temporary holding." Bryn stood. She did not argue. She had learned long ago that arguing only made it worse. She picked up her bag and followed Caswell back into the corridor. He walked quickly. She kept pace as best she could. They passed other personnel. Some glanced at her, some looked away. No one met her eyes. Caswell deposited her in a waiting area near the medical wing. Chairs lined the walls. A clock hung above the door. He gestured toward the seats without a word and walked away. Bryn sat. The waiting room was sterile, white walls, gray floor. The kind of space designed to make people feel small. Through a glass partition, she could see into an administrative office. Drummond was on the phone, nodding, gesturing. Another officer entered the room, looked toward the glass, then back at Drummond. They were talking about her. The clock read 9:15. Bryn pulled out her phone. A message notification glowed on the screen. "Assignment confirmation, Medical Unit 7. Report 0900 hours." She looked at the clock again. 9:23 now. She set the phone down and waited. Time moved slowly. Personnel walked past the waiting area. A young medic glanced at her, then quickly looked away when she met his gaze. Another officer passed, then another. No one stopped. No one spoke to her. The clock read 9:45. Bryn shifted in the chair. Her leg throbbed. She pressed her hand against her thigh, applying pressure to the muscle beneath. It helped, slightly. She focused on her breathing. In, out, steady, controlled. Through the glass, Drummond was still on the phone. The conversation seemed tense. The other officer had left. Drummond rubbed her temples, then typed something into her computer. The clock read 10:15. A nurse walked by, carrying a stack of files. She glanced at Bryn, hesitated, then kept walking. Bryn watched her go. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. The clock read 10:23. Caswell returned. He held a manila folder in one hand. His expression was flat. He stopped in front of Bryn and looked down at her. "Major Drummond has determined you are not fit for this particular assignment," he said. "Your contract has been terminated for medical incompatibility." Bryn stood slowly. "I was cleared by 3 separate medical boards." Caswell's jaw tightened. "Those boards did not see you walk." She stared at him. He did not look away. The folder hung between them like a verdict. "Gather your things," he said. "I will escort you out." Bryn picked up her bag. She did not argue. She did not plead. She simply followed him back down the corridor. The walk felt longer this time, each step heavier. They passed through the main hallway of the medical building. A group of personnel stood near a bulletin board. They stopped talking as Bryn approached, watched her limp past, resumed their conversation only after she had turned the corner. Caswell led her outside. The sun was brutal now, reflecting off the pavement in waves of heat. They walked toward the motor pool. A group of younger soldiers stood near a row of Humvees. One of them saw Bryn approaching and nudged his companion. Both watched. They really thought she could keep up with operators, one of them said. His voice carried. Another soldier laughed. Not exactly Widowmaker material. The first soldier turned to him. What is a Widowmaker? Special ops, like the real deal. Not, he gestured vaguely toward Bryn without finishing the sentence. Bryn kept walking. Her face remained neutral. Her jaw tightened. Her hand brushed against her left thigh. Once, briefly, a reflex, a reminder. They reached the main gate. Howell was still on duty. He saw them coming and stepped out of the booth. Caswell handed him the folder without a word. Howell opened it, scanned the contents, then looked at Bryn. His expression was something close to satisfaction. "Better luck with desk work, ma'am," he said. "Not everyone is cut out for field duty." Bryn took her identification from him. She did not respond. She turned and walked toward her car. The gate opened behind her. She heard it close as she reached the vehicle. She set her bag in the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel. Her hands rested on the steering wheel. She did not start the engine. Not yet. She stared at the gate in the rearview mirror. Howell had gone back into the booth. Rosh was checking the identification of another vehicle, everything continuing as if she had never been there. She started the car, pulled out of the lot, drove through the gate and onto the highway. The base disappeared behind her. She drove for 10 minutes before pulling onto the shoulder. The road was empty. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions. She turned off the engine and sat in silence. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. Unknown number? She let it ring. It stopped, then started again. She closed her eyes and leaned her head against the steering wheel. Her leg ached. Her chest felt tight. She had been here before, rejected, dismissed, judged in seconds for something that had nothing to do with her capability. The phone stopped ringing. She opened her eyes and stared at the empty road ahead. Somewhere behind her, Fort Meridian continued its operations. Somewhere ahead, the rest of her life waited. She did not know what that looked like anymore. The time was 10:47. At Fort Meridian, the air traffic control tower overlooked the entire base. Sergeant Pavelka sat at his station, monitoring the radar. The morning had been quiet. A few routine flights, standard patterns, nothing unusual. At 11:03, 4 signatures appeared on his screen. Southwest approach, low altitude, tight formation, no transponder codes, no flight plan. Pavelka leaned forward, checked the display, checked again. Tower to inbound formation, he said into his headset. Identify yourselves. You are entering restricted airspace. Silence. He looked at his supervisor, who had stepped closer to the screen. 4 rotary wing, Pavelka said. Flying nap of the Earth. No codes, no clearance. The supervisor frowned. Military. Has to be. But they are not ours. The signatures moved closer. Faster than standard approach speed, the supervisor reached for the red phone that connected directly to base command. On the screen, the 4 signatures tightened their formation. They were not following standard flight protocols. They were moving like a strike element. The radio crackled. A voice cut through. Cold, clipped, absolutely commanding. Fort Meridian, this is Widowmaker Actual. We are inbound for immediate landing. Clear the tarmac. Pavelka pressed his headset tighter. Widowmaker Actual, you are not on our authorized flight schedule. State your... The voice interrupted. We are not requesting clearance. We are informing you. Prepare landing zone Delta. Where is our medic? Pavelka looked at his supervisor. The older man had gone pale. He was already speaking into the red phone. Get the colonel, he said. Now. Outside, the sound of rotors began to reach the base. Faint at first, then louder. Personnel on the ground stopped what they were doing and looked toward the sky. 4 black shapes appeared on the horizon. Low, fast, flying in. Perfect combat formation. The Black Hawks circled the base once. Rotor wash disturbed everything below. Dust kicked up from the tarmac. Windows rattled in nearby buildings. Then the helicopters descended lower, forcing all other air traffic to ground immediately. The base loudspeaker crackled to life. Partial lockdown protocols initiated. Red lights began flashing at key checkpoints. In the command center, Colonel Garrick Lattimore burst through the door. His uniform was hastily adjusted. His face was flushed. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. A radio operator turned to him. "Sir, 4 unidentified Black Hawks are circling the base. They are demanding immediate access." "Unidentified," Lattimore snapped. "Are they military or not?" "They appear to be, sir. But they are not broadcasting proper identification codes. They are not in our system." Lattimore grabbed the radio. "Unidentified aircraft, this is Fort Meridian Base Commander. You are in violation of—" The voice cut him off. Same tone. Same ice-cold authority. "Colonel, you have 2 minutes to tell me where Bryn Harlow is, or we are landing regardless of your protocols." Lattimore stared at the radio. "Who is this?" "What unit?" "Widowmaker." "Actual—" "And your base turned away our combat medic 90 minutes ago. You are going to fix that. Now." An intelligence officer was already pulling up files on a computer terminal. "Sir," he said, his voice tight, "Widowmaker is a call sign associated with a classified special operations element. They are off books for most joint operations. Their classification level is above ours." Lattimore's jaw worked. "What is their jurisdiction?" The officer shook his head. "Unclear, sir. But their clearance is high, very high." On the tarmac, armed security teams were deploying. Sergeant Howell stood among them, weapon ready, staring at the sky. The helicopters had not landed. They were hovering, circling, like predators assessing their target. Howell keyed his radio. "What the hell is a widow? Maker?" No answer came. The radio in the command center crackled again. The voice was colder now, more dangerous. "Fort Meridian Command, you have 30 seconds to locate Bryn Harlow and reverse your decision. After that, we are landing with or without your permission." "Your choice, Colonel." Lattimore turned to his staff. "Who is Bryn Harlow? Why was she here?" An administrator pulled up the gate log. "Civilian medical contractor. Arrived 0847. Departed 1047. "Why did she leave?" Lattimore demanded. The administrator hesitated. "Medical admin rejected her, sir. Something about mobility issues." Lattimore's face darkened. "Get me Major Drummond, now." Outside, the helicopters descended lower still. The sound was deafening. Personnel covered their ears. Equipment shook. The base had never seen anything like this. Not in training, not in drills. This was real. This was happening. In the command center, an officer looked up from his terminal. "Sir, I found her file. Bryn Harlow, civilian medical contractor. But there is something else." "What?" The officer's face had gone white. "Her file has a classified annex. It is sealed above our clearance level. I cannot access it." Lattimore stepped closer. "What does that mean?" "It means we do not have authorization to see her full operational history. But there is a note flagged for command review." "Read it." The officer cleared his throat. "Medical contractor Bryn Harlow. Former designation, Widowmaker 1. Combat medic. Classified special operations element. All inquiries require direct unit authorization." The room went silent. Lattimore stared at the screen. "Widowmaker 1. The radio crackled. "Time is up, Colonel. We are coming in. You will tell us where Bryn Harlow is, or we will find her ourselves." The 4 Black Hawks broke formation and began their final approach to the tarmac. Lattimore grabbed the radio again. "We are locating her now. Do not land without clearance." The voice did not respond. The wide helicopters descended. Dust and debris exploded across the flight line. Security teams held their positions. Weapons raised but not aimed. No one knew if this was hostile. No one knew what to do. The Black Hawks touched down in perfect synchronization. The rotors continued spinning. The cargo doors slid open. 6 figures emerged from the lead helicopter, full tactical gear, faces partially obscured. They moved with absolute precision. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The lead operator stepped forward and removed his helmet. Dane Kephart, late 30s. Calm, controlled, radiating authority in a way that had nothing to do with rank. He walked directly toward Colonel Lattimore, who had come out onto the tarmac. You just violated about 15 federal aviation regulations, Lattimore began. Kephart interrupted. Where is Bryn Harlow? We are locating her now, Lattimore said, but you need to explain why. We requested her by name, Kephart said. She was authorized for this deployment. Why? Was she turned away? Major Drummond had arrived on the scene. She was medically unfit, Drummond said, her voice defensive. I made that assessment. Kephart turned slowly to face her. His silence was terrifying. What made you conclude she was unfit? He asked. His voice was measured, dangerous. Drummond straightened. She has a significant mobility impairment. She could not possibly keep pace or function effectively in field conditions. Kephart stared at her. A limp. Yes, Drummond said. A severe one. Do you know how she got that limp, Major? Drummond did not answer. Another operator stepped forward. Novak. Early 40s, scarred, one eye slightly damaged. He spoke quietly, but everyone on the tarmac heard him. She got it pulling 3 of us out of a burning Humvee while taking enemy fire. She refused medical evacuation until the entire team was secured and the mission was complete. Pause. That was 7 years ago. The tarmac went completely silent. Drummond's face had drained of color. Howell, standing nearby with his weapon, stared at the ground. Lattimore looked from Kephart to Drummond and back again. Kephart's voice was ice. We do not operate without her. We requested her for this mission because there is no one else we trust. Your people judged her based on how she walks. We judge her based on why she can still walk at all. An officer ran up to Lattimore. Sir, we have made contact. Security located Ms. Harlow approximately 19 miles out. They are bringing her back now. Kephart's expression did not change. Tell your people to treat her with respect, or they will answer to me. On Highway 40, Bryn sat in her car, staring at her phone. Unknown number, 5th call, she finally answered. Ms. Harlow, a voice said, this is Fort Meridian-based security. We need you to return to the base immediately. Bryn closed her eyes. I was told my assignment was terminated. The situation has changed. Please return. It is urgent. What situation? A pause. Your unit is here. Ma'am, Bryn's expression shifted. They landed. Yes, ma'am, 4 Black Hawks. They are waiting for you. A security vehicle pulled up behind her car. 2 military police officers stepped out. One approached her window. They did not treat her the way they had before. One actually opened her door for her. We will escort you back, ma'am, the officer said. Your team is on the flight line. Bryn got into the security vehicle. She did not speak. Through the window, she watched the desert pass. Then, the base appeared. 4 Black Hawks sat on the tarmac, rotors still turning slowly. Personnel gathered at a distance. Through the dust and heat, she could see figures near the helicopters. One of them turned. Even at this distance, she recognized the stance. Kephart. The vehicle stopped at the edge of the flight line. The door opened. Bryn stepped out, her bag in one hand, her limp unchanged. She looked across the tarmac at the team that had come for her, the team that never left anyone behind. If this story has reminded you of someone who gave everything and asked for nothing in return, take a moment to honor them. Share your story below. And if you believe that true strength is often invisible, stay with us. There is more to come. The security vehicle rolled through the main gate of Fort Meridian at 11:32. Bryn sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap. The 2 military police officers in front had not spoken since they picked her up. One had offered her water. She had declined. The silence was not hostile. It was careful, as if they knew something had shifted but did not yet understand what. Through the window, Bryn watched the base unfold, the same buildings she had passed 2 hours earlier, the same motor pool, the same barracks. But now personnel lined the pathways, watching. Word had spread. Something was happening on the flight line, something unprecedented. The vehicle slowed as they approached the tarmac. Bryn saw the helicopters first. 4 black. Hawks in a tight row, rotors still turning at idle speed. The sound was a low, rhythmic thunder that vibrated through the ground. Dust swirled in lazy circles around the landing zone. Beyond the aircraft, a crowd had gathered. Security teams, officers, enlisted personnel keeping their distance but unable to look away. The vehicle stopped 50 yards from the helicopters. The driver turned in his seat. Ma'am, your team is waiting near the lead aircraft. Bryn nodded. She reached for the door handle. The other officer moved to open it for her, but she was already out. Her boots hit the pavement. Her left leg took the weight unevenly. The limp was there. It would always be there. She stood for a moment, bag in hand, and looked across the tarmac. 6 figures stood near the lead Black Hawk, full tactical gear, weapons slung, faces partially visible now that some had removed their helmets. She recognized each silhouette. The way Novak stood with his weight shifted slightly to his right side. The way Thorn held his hands loose at his sides. The way Keithhart's posture never fully relaxed, even at rest. She started walking. The distance felt longer than it was, every step visible to the crowd, every uneven stride amplified by the silence. She did not look at the personnel watching from the perimeter. She did not look at Colonel Lattimore, who stood off to the side with Major Drummond and several other officers. She looked only at the team ahead. Kephart saw her first. His expression shifted, not quite a smile, something softer, something that carried weight. He took 2 steps forward and stopped, waiting. Bryn reached the halfway point. Her leg ached from the walk, from the sitting, from the tension that had lived in her muscles since she first arrived at the gate that morning. She adjusted her grip on the bag and kept moving. 20 yards, 15, 10. Kephart spoke first. His voice was steady, controlled, but there was something underneath it. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. Widowmaker won. Bryn stopped 3 feet from him. She set her bag down, looked at him, then at Novak, then Thorn, then the others. Quinn Aldrich stood near the rear of the group, arms crossed, a faint smile on his scarred face. 2 newer operators she did not recognize flanked the group, watching her with something close to reverence. "You are early," she said. Keephart's jaw tightened. "We were waiting for you. When you did not show up, we came looking." Novak stepped forward. "Standard protocol," he said. "No one gets left behind." Thorn moved next to him, not even at a medical checkpoint. Bryn's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. She touched her left thigh briefly. The same unconscious gesture she had made at the gate, at the medical office, in her car. A reflex tied to memory. Colonel Lattimore approached from the side. His face was pale. His uniform was wrinkled from the speed with which he had dressed. He stopped a respectful distance away and cleared his throat. "Ms. Harlow," he began, "there has been a grave error in judgment regarding your assignment. On behalf of this base, I want to offer our sincere—" Bryn turned to Keephart, ignoring Lattimore mid-sentence. "What is the op window?" Keephart glanced at Lattimore, then back at Bryn. 18 hours, then we do not have time for this." She picked up her bag and walked past Lattimore without another glance. The team fell in around her, Novak on her left, Thorn on her right, Kephart leading. They moved toward the helicopters as a unit, practiced, familiar. The way people move when they have trusted each other with their lives. Lattimore stood frozen. Major Drummond, who had followed him onto the tarmac, looked stricken. Sergeant Howell was near the edge of the security perimeter, weapon lowered, face unreadable. Lieutenant Caswell stood further back, partially hidden behind a supply truck. Bryn did not look at any of them. They had ceased to matter. Kephart stopped near the cargo door of the lead Black Hawk. Bryn set her bag inside and turned back to face the base personnel for the first time. Her gaze swept across the crowd, stopped briefly on Drummond, moved to Howell, settled nowhere. She was looking at them the way one might look at a landscape. Present, but irrelevant. Lattimore found his voice again. "Ms. Harlow, please. We need to understand what happened here. Your file was not fully accessible. If we had known—" Novak interrupted. "If you had known, you would have done your job. Instead, you saw a limp and made a decision." Thorn stepped forward. "How long did it take you, Major? 90 seconds? 2 minutes?" Drummond opened her mouth, closed it. She had no answer. Kephart pulled a tactical tablet from his gear and walked toward Lattimore. He held it out. "This is the after-action report from the operation where she was injured. It is classified. I am granting you temporary access. Read it." Lattimore took the tablet. His hands were not steady. He looked down at the screen. The file was dense. Mission parameters, personnel roster, engagement summary, casualty report. He scrolled slowly, his expression changing with each line. Bryn watched him read. Her face showed nothing. Kephart stood beside her, arms crossed. The rest of the team remained in formation near the helicopter. The crowd had grown. More personnel had gathered. Some had come from other parts of the base, drawn by the commotion. The sight of 4 Black Hawks on the tarmac. The sight of a civilian contractor standing surrounded by operators who looked ready to go to war over her. Lattimore reached the end of the report. He looked up. His face had gone gray. "You pulled them out," he said quietly. "Under fire, while wounded." Bryn said nothing. Lattimore looked at Drummond. "Did you read any of this?" Drummond's voice was barely audible. "I did not have clearance. Did you request it?" Silence. Kephart took the tablet back. She pulled Novak and Thorne out of a burning vehicle after an IED strike, took a round to her femur in the process, refused evacuation, continued treating casualties under sustained enemy contact for 6 additional hours. When we finally extracted, she had lost 40% of her blood volume. Doctors said she would never walk unaided again. He paused. She was walking within 8 months, requalified for deployment within a year. She has been operational ever since. Novak lifted his shirt slightly, revealing a long scar along his ribs. She kept me breathing when my lung collapsed. Did it with one hand because the other was holding pressure on Thorne. Thorne turned and pulled down the collar of his shirt, exposing a jagged scar near his collarbone. "Exit wound," he said. She dug the round out in a field hospital when it started to migrate. Every other medic said to wait for surgery. She said we did not have time. She was right. Aldrich stepped forward for the first time. She saved my life twice, once during the ambush Kephart I mentioned, once 3 years later in Kandahar when my wound went septic and I started crashing. She did not leave my side for 72 hours. The tarmac had gone completely silent. Even the helicopters seemed quieter. The rotors still turned, but the sound felt distant, muted. Lattimore looked at Bryn. "I am sorry," he said. "We failed you. This base failed you." Bryn met his eyes. "Apologies do not change what happened. They never do." She turned and climbed into the Black Hawk. The team followed. Kephart was last. He paused in the doorway and looked back at Lattimore. "We do not leave our people behind," Kephart said. "Not in combat, not at a checkpoint. You might want to remember that." He climbed in and pulled the door shut. The rotors began to spin faster. The sound intensified. Dust rose in thick clouds. Personnel shielded their eyes and stepped back. Inside the lead helicopter, Bryn strapped into her seat. The interior was familiar. The layout, the equipment, the smell of fuel and oil and desert dust. She had spent years in birds like this, training, deploying, extracting. It felt more like home than any building ever had. Novak sat across from her. He was checking his weapon, but his eyes kept drifting to her leg. "Does it still hurt?" he asked. "Every day." "Good." She looked at him. "Good." Novak nodded. "Means you remember, means you are still here." Thorne was inspecting Bryn's medical kit, a ritual he had maintained for years. He opened pouches, checked supplies, verified equipment. Everything was in place, everything where it should be. He closed the kit and handed it back to her. "You good, widow. Always. Liar." They both smiled, small, brief, the kind of smile that comes from shared history. Kephart sat down next to Bryn as the helicopter began to lift. He did not say anything at first, just sat there, looking out the window as the base fell away beneath them, the tarmac, the buildings, the personnel growing smaller. "Thank you for coming," Bryn said quietly. Kephart turned to her. "We were not going to leave you there, I know. Do you?" She looked at him. "Yes." The Black Hawk climbed higher. The other 3 helicopters fell into formation. They banked east, away from the base, toward terrain only they knew. Bryn looked out the window one last time. Fort Meridian was a small grid of structures now, insignificant against the desert. She turned away and did not look back. On the tarmac below, Colonel Lattimore stood with the tablet still in his hand. Major Drummond had walked away. Caswell had disappeared entirely. Howell remained at the perimeter, staring at the sky where the helicopters had vanished. Lattimore looked down at the tablet. The file was still open. He scrolled back to the beginning and read it again. Slower this time. Every detail, every notation, every commendation. An intelligence officer approached. "Sir, What do you want me to tell command about the unauthorized landing? Lattimore closed the tablet. Tell them it was a personnel retrieval, authorized under emergency protocols. But, sir, it was not. It is now. Retroactively. File the paperwork. The officer hesitated. Yes, sir. Lattimore walked back toward the command building. Personnel moved out of his way. He passed Drummond, who stood near the medical building, arms crossed, staring at nothing. He did not stop. Inside his office, he sat behind his desk and opened his computer. He pulled up the base personnel protocols, scrolled to the medical assessment section, read through the procedures, then he opened a new document and began typing. Effective immediately, all personnel assessments will include comprehensive review of operational history prior to any medical determinations based on physical observation. Capability is not determined by appearance. Qualified personnel will not be dismissed without full review of service record and mission history. This base failed to meet that standard. It will not happen again. He saved the document, sent it to the base adjutant for immediate distribution. Then he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. In the medical administration building, Major Drummond sat alone in her office. Bryn's file was still open on her computer. She had finally gained access to the classified annex. She read through it slowly. Mission summaries, combat reports, medical evaluations, letters of commendation. One report stood out. The ambush. 7 years prior. She read the details. The IED strike, the burning vehicle, the enemy contact. Bryn's actions under fire, the extent of her injuries. There was a photograph attached. Bryn in full combat gear, younger, standing with her team. All of them smiling, Novak with his arm around her shoulders, Thorne holding up a badly dented helmet. Kephart in the background, arms crossed, the faintest hint of a smile on his face. Drummond stared at the photo for a long time. Then she closed the file. She stood and walked to the window. The tarmac was empty now. The helicopters were gone. The crowd had dispersed. Everything looked normal, as if nothing had happened, but something had. At the main gate, Sergeant Howell was relieved of duty 2 hours early. No explanation given. He was told to report to his commanding officer the following morning. He knew what that meant. He walked to his vehicle in silence, got in, and sat there. He did not start the engine. He stared at the gate. At the checkpoint where he had processed Bryn that morning. Better luck with desk work, ma'am. Not everyone is cut out for field duty. His own words, his own voice. He heard them in his head, over and over. He closed his eyes, started the engine, drove home. Lieutenant Caswell was reassigned that evening. Temporary duty at a logistics depot 300 miles away. Effective immediately. He packed his belongings in under an hour and left the base without speaking to anyone. The younger soldiers who had mocked Bryn near the motor pool were called in for counseling. Not disciplinary action, not formally. Just a conversation with their platoon sergeant about professionalisms and assumptions. They sat in uncomfortable silence as the sergeant explained what had actually happened on the tarmac, who the woman with the limp really was, what she had done, what she had sacrificed. One of them asked if they could apologize. The sergeant shook his head. She is gone, and she would not care about your apology anyway. What you can do is remember, and do better. They were dismissed. They walked back to the barracks in silence. Across the base, the story spread. Whispered in mess halls, shared in barracks. Passed along from one shift to another. The civilian contractor who had been turned away. The 4 Blackhawks that came for her. The operators who confronted the base commander. The limp that told a story no one had bothered to read. By evening, everyone knew, and everyone understood what had been lost. Miles away, the 4 Blackhawks flew in formation over the desert. Inside the lead bird, Bryn was reviewing mission parameters on a tablet Kephart had handed her. Tactical maps, personnel assignments, threat assessments. She scrolled through each section, her expression focused. Novak leaned forward. You have questions? Several, Bryn said without looking up. Starting with why you requested me specifically. Kephart answered. Because you know how we operate. Because you have been with us longer than anyone currently on the team, except Novak and Thorne. Because there is no one else we trust in a hot zone. Bryn glanced at him. Flattery will not distract me from the fact that this mission profile is incomplete. Kephart's expression did not change. The The rest is compartmented. You will be briefed on the ground. She closed the tablet. If I am walking into something blind, I need more than this. You are not walking into anything blind. You are walking in with us. That is all the information you need. Bryn held his gaze, then nodded. The helicopters banked south. The terrain below shifted from flat desert to rocky foothills. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Inside the cabin, the light turned amber, warm, almost peaceful. Thorne was cleaning his weapon, the motions automatic. Aldrich was going through his pack, checking gear. The two newer operators sat quietly, watching Bryn. One of them finally spoke. "Ma'am, I am Corporal Reeve. This is Specialist Koss. We were not part of the team when you were active, but we have heard the stories." Bryn looked at them. Stories tend to get exaggerated. Reeve shook his head. "Not these ones. If anything, people understate what happened." Koss nodded. "We know what you did. We know what it cost. It is an honor to operate with you." Bryn did not know how to respond to that. She settled for a simple nod. The young operators seemed satisfied. Novak caught her eye and smiled slightly. "They have been nervous about meeting you. For weeks. Why? Because you are a legend. And legends are intimidating. I am just a medic." "No," Keepart said quietly. "You are Widowmaker 1. There is a difference." The helicopters began their descent. The landing zone appeared below. A remote airstrip in the middle of nowhere. A few structures, support vehicles, personnel moving with purpose. The Black Hawks touched down in sequence. Rotors stayed hot. This was not the final destination, just a refueling point. Bryn stepped out of the helicopter and stretched. Her leg protested. She ignored it. The ground crew was already moving to refuel the birds. Kephart was conferring with someone in a tactical operations center. Novak and Thorne were checking equipment. Aldrich walked over to Bryn. "How are you holding up?" "Fine. You were lying again." She smiled. "Probably." He glanced at her leg. "When was the last time you had it looked at?" "6 months ago." And the doctors said what they always say. "It is functional. It will never be perfect. Manage the pain and adapt." Aldrich nodded. "You have been adapting for 7 years. You are better at it than most. I do not have much choice. None of us do. That is why we are still here." Keefhart returned from the operations center. He gathered the team together. "Brief update," he said. "Timeline has moved up. We are wheels up in 20 minutes. Final destination is 4 hours out. Mission brief will happen in transit." "Understood," Bryn said. The team dispersed to finish preparations. Bryn checked her medical kit one more time. Supplies, medications, instruments, everything accounted for. Everything ready. She had done this 1,000 times. The routine was muscle memory. Novak appeared beside her. "You know this one is going to be rough. They are always rough. Not like this. Kephart is keeping details tight for a reason." Bryn looked at him. "Are you trying to warn me off?" "No. I am trying to make sure you know what you are walking into. I am walking into the same thing I always walk. Into. A mission. With my team. That has not changed." Novak studied her face. "No, it is not." The helicopters were refueled. The team loaded back in. Engines spun up. The Black Hawks lifted off in formation and climbed into the darkening sky. The sun had set, leaving only a band of orange along the horizon. Stars were beginning to appear. Inside the lead helicopter, Kephart opened a secure briefing file on his tablet. He handed it to Bryn. "This is everything we have. Memorize it. The file will be wiped in 30 minutes." Bryn took the tablet and began reading. The mission parameters were complex: high-risk insertion, multiple threat vectors, limited support, extraction dependent on mission success, the kind of operation that could go wrong in 100 different ways. She read through the medical contingencies, casualty estimates, evacuation protocols, blood supply coordination. She made mental notes, adjusted her kit priorities in her head, planned for scenarios the file did not explicitly mention. When she finished, she handed the tablet back to Kephart. "Understood. Questions? Only one. Why me, specifically?" "There are other combat medics, younger, faster." Kephart looked at her. "Because when everything goes wrong, and it will, You are the one who will figure out how to keep us alive. You have done it before. You will do it again. That is a lot of faith. It is earned faith. There is a difference. The helicopters flew on through the night. The desert below was invisible now, just darkness and the faint glow of distant lights. Inside the cabin, the team settled into the quiet rhythm of pre-mission focus. Weapons checked, gear secured, minds preparing for what was ahead. Bryn closed her eyes and let herself feel the vibration of the helicopter, the thrum of the rotors, the familiar sensation of being airborne, moving towards something unknown. Her leg ached. Her back was stiff from sitting. She ignored both. There would be time to deal with pain later. Right now, she needed to focus. She thought about the base, about Drummond and Howell and Caswell, about the judgment in their eyes, the dismissal, the assumption that her limp defined her capability. She had spent 7 years proving people wrong. She would spend 7 more if necessary. It did not matter. What mattered was the mission. What mattered was the team. She opened her eyes. Cavehart was watching her. "You good?" he asked. "Always," she said. He smiled. Liar. She smiled back. The Black Hawks continued into the night, 4 dark shapes moving through darker sky, carrying a team that had come together through fire and blood and sacrifice, carrying a medic who had given everything and asked for nothing, carrying Widowmaker 1 back to the field where she belonged. Behind them, Fort Meridian continued its operations, lights glowing, personnel moving, routines maintained. But something had changed, something that could not be undone, a lesson learned too late, a judgment revealed as failure. Assumption exposed as ignorance. The base would remember. The story would be told and retold. The woman with the limp who was escorted out in humiliation. The 4 Black Hawks that came for her. The operators who reminded everyone that respect is earned in the fire, not granted in an office. And somewhere in the night, flying toward a mission only they understood, Bryn Harlow touched her left thigh one more time. Not from pain, not from memory, but from certainty. She was exactly where she needed to be, with exactly the people who understood. And nothing else mattered. The helicopters disappeared into the darkness, the sound of their rotors fading, leaving only silence and the weight of what had been lost and found in a single day. True respect is not given. It is recognized. And sometimes it arrives in 4 Black Hawks demanding the return of someone who never needed permission to be extraordinary. If you have ever witnessed someone being underestimated and then proven irreplaceable, share that story. And if you value the truth behind the scars, stay with us. The security vehicle rolled through Fort Meridian's main gate at 11:32. The morning sun was relentless now, baking the pavement and creating waves of heat that distorted the air. Bryn sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap, watching the base unfold through the window. The same buildings she had passed hours earlier, the same checkpoints, the same infrastructure. But everything felt different now. The 2 military police officers in the front seat had barely spoken since picking her up on Highway 40. When they first approached her car, their demeanor had been different from the personnel who escorted her out. One had actually opened her door. The other had carried her bag to the vehicle without being asked. Small gestures. But they spoke to a shift in how she was being perceived. Through the windshield, Bryn could see activity on the flight line. Personnel had gathered at a distance from 4 Black Hawks sitting on the tarmac. The helicopter's rotors were still turning at idle speed, creating a constant low thunder that she could feel even from inside the vehicle. Dust swirled in circles around the landing zone. The sight triggered something in her. Memory, recognition, home. The vehicle slowed as they approached the tarmac perimeter. The driver turned in his seat. "Ma'am, your team is waiting near the lead aircraft. We will take you as close as authorized. Thank you." The vehicle stopped at the edge of the restricted zone. Bryn reached for the door handle. The passenger side officer moved to help, but she was already stepping out. Her left foot hit the pavement, and the familiar unevenness in her gait returned. Hours of sitting had stiffened the muscles. The drive back had given the old injury time to settle into a deeper ache, but she had learned long ago to push through the initial discomfort. Movement helped. Standing still made it worse. She pulled her medical deployment bag from the back seat and straightened. The tarmac stretched before her, 50 yards of open space between where she stood and where her team waited. Beyond the helicopters, she could see personnel watching, base command staff, security teams, officers and enlisted personnel who had stopped their routines to witness whatever was unfolding. She took her first step, then another. The limp was pronounced. There was no hiding it now, no energy left to compensate. But as she walked across that open space, something fundamental shifted in how she carried herself. This was not the walk of someone being escorted off base in humiliation. This was the walk of someone returning to where she belonged. Near the lead Black Hawk, 6 figures stood in a loose formation. She recognized them even at this distance. The way Keefhart stood with his weight balanced, always ready to move. The way Novak's shoulders were slightly hunched from old injuries that never fully healed. The way Thorn kept his hands loose at his sides, a habit from years of weapon discipline. And Quinn Aldrich, arms crossed, watching her approach with the intensity of someone who had been waiting too long. Kephart saw her first. His posture changed, the subtle shift from operational alertness to something more personal. He took 2 steps forward and stopped, giving her space to close the distance on her own terms. Bryn reached the 30-yard mark. Her leg was protesting now, sending sharp signals up through her hip. She ignored them, focused on steady movement, controlled breathing, the same discipline she had used to cross a battlefield 7 years ago with a shattered femur. 20 yards, 15, 10. She could see their faces clearly now. Keephart's expression was controlled, but there was something in his eyes. Relief, perhaps, or validation. Novak was watching her with the kind of attention he usually reserved for threat assessment. Thorn had the faintest smile. Aldrich's arms had uncrossed, his stance shifting to something more welcoming. 5 yards. Bryn stopped, set her bag down, made eye contact with each of them. These were the people who had flown into restricted airspace without clearance, who had confronted a base commander, who had demanded her return, not because regulations required it, but because in their world, you did not leave your people behind. Ever. Kephart spoke first. His voice was steady, measured, but carrying weight underneath. Widowmaker 1. It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement, a statement of fact, a reminder of who she was beyond the judgment of people who did not know her story. Bryn held his gaze. You are early. Keephart's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Something that might have been a smile. We were waiting for you. When you did not show up, we came looking. Novak stepped forward. Standard protocol. No one gets left behind. Thorn moved beside him. Not even at a checkpoint run by people who do not know what they are looking at. Bryn felt something tighten in her chest. She had spent 2 hours believing her career with military medicine was over. 2 hours thinking that the injury she earned saving lives had finally become the thing that ended her usefulness. 2 hours alone with the weight of rejection. And now her team stood before her, having crossed every line to bring her back. She touched her left thigh. The gesture was unconscious. Automatic. A physical reminder of why she was here, why she walked the way she did, why the pain was worth carrying. Quinn Aldrich spoke from his position near the rear. About damn time, Widow. We have been burning fuel waiting for you. 2 younger operators stood slightly behind the primary team. She did not recognize them, new additions since her last deployment. They watched her with expressions that mixed respect and curiosity. These were people who had heard stories, but never met the source. Behind them, Colonel Lattimore was approaching. Bryn could see him in her peripheral vision. His uniform was slightly disheveled. His face was pale. He stopped a respectful distance away and cleared his throat. Ms. Harlow, he began. His voice carried the weight of someone who understood they had made a catastrophic error. There has been a grave mistake in judgment regarding your assignment. On behalf of this base and everyone involved in the decision, I want to offer our most sincere apologies and... Bryn turned to Kephart without letting Lattimore finish. What is the operational window? Kephart understood immediately. 18 hours. Then we do not have time for this. She picked up her medical bag and walked past Lattimore as if he were part of the landscape. Immobile, irrelevant. The team fell in around her naturally. Kephart took point. Novak and Thorn flanked her. Aldrich brought up the rear. The 2 new operators integrated into the formation seamlessly. They moved toward the helicopters as a single unit, practiced, familiar. The kind of coordination that only came from shared experience and absolute trust. Lattimore stood frozen mid-sentence. Major Drummond had appeared near the command building, watching from a distance. Her face was ashen. Lieutenant Caswell was partially visible behind a supply vehicle, as if trying to make himself smaller. Sergeant Howell stood with the security team at the perimeter, weapon lowered, staring at the ground. Bryn did not look at any of them. They had made their judgment. They had rendered their verdict. And now they were learning what that judgment had cost them. Not her career. That was intact. Not her confidence. That had never wavered. They had cost themselves the opportunity to work with someone exceptional. That was their loss to carry. Kephart stopped near the cargo door of the lead Black Hawk. Bryn set her bag inside the aircraft and turned back toward the assembled base personnel. For the first time since returning, she looked directly at them. Not with anger. Not with vindication. With something far more powerful. Indifference. They simply did not matter anymore. Lattimore found his voice again. "Ms. Harlow, please. We need to understand what happened here. Your file was not fully accessible to our medical staff. If we had known your complete operational history," Novak interrupted. "If you had known, you would have done your job properly. Instead, you saw a limp and made a decision in 90 seconds. Thorne stepped forward, his voice carrying across the tarmac. "How long did it take, Major Drummond? 2 minutes to watch her walk. 3 minutes to decide she was unfit. How much time did you spend actually reviewing her credentials?" Drummond had moved closer. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her hands were shaking slightly. Kephart pulled a tactical tablet from his gear and walked toward Lattimore. He held it out with the kind of deliberate movement that commanded attention. "This is the classified after-action report from the operation, where she sustained her injury. I am granting you temporary access. Read it. Understand what you dismissed." Lattimore took the tablet with hands that were not quite steady. He looked down at the screen. The file header was marked with classification stamps, mission parameters, personnel roster, engagement summary. He began scrolling. His expression changed with each paragraph. Surprise, then shock, then something approaching horror as the full scope of what had happened became clear. The tarmac had gone completely silent except for the idle rotors and the wind. More personnel had gathered. Word was spreading through the base. Something unprecedented was happening on the flight line. The crowd continued to grow. Bryn watched Lattimore read. Her face showed nothing. Kephart stood beside her, arms crossed. The rest of the team maintained their positions near the helicopter, waiting, ready, a unified front that made it absolutely clear where their loyalty lay. Lattimore reached a section of the report and stopped scrolling. His face had drained of color. He read the passage twice, looked up at Bryn, then back down at the screen. "You pulled them out of a burning vehicle," he said quietly, "while taking fire, while wounded." Bryn said nothing, just held his gaze. Lattimore turned to Drummond. His voice was tight. "Did you review any of this? Any of her operational history beyond the basic medical clearance?" Drummond's voice was barely audible. "I did not have clearance to access the classified portions." "Did you request it? Did you ask why portions of her file were sealed? Did you do anything beyond observe her physical movement and make a judgment?" Silence. Kephart took the tablet back. His voice was controlled but carried an edge that made it clear this was not a discussion. She pulled Novak and Thorne from a vehicle hit by an IED, took a round to her femur during the extraction, refused medical evacuation, continued treating casualties under sustained enemy contact for 6 more hours. When we finally got her to a field hospital, she had lost nearly half her blood volume. Doctors said she would never walk again without mechanical assistance. He paused, letting that sink in. She was walking within 8 months, back to full operational status within a year. She has been deploying with special operations units ever since, and you rejected her because she limps. Novak stepped forward and lifted his shirt, revealing a long scar that ran along his ribcage. "She kept me breathing when my lung collapsed during that ambush. Did it with one hand while using the other to hold pressure on Thorne's neck wound. Thorne pulled down his collar, exposing a jagged scar near his collarbone. I was bleeding out, unconscious. She stabilized me in a burning vehicle while taking fire, then dragged me 20 feet before the Humvee exploded. Aldrich moved forward. I was not there for the original ambush, but 3 years later in Kandahar, I went into septic shock from a wound. Infection. Every medic said to wait for surgery. She said, we did not have time. She was right. I would have died waiting. One of the younger operators spoke for the first time. Corporal Reeves, sir. I have only been with this unit for 8 months, but I have seen her work. I have seen her keep people alive in conditions where survival should have been impossible. She is the reason half of us are still here. The other young operator nodded. Specialist Koss. Same, sir. We requested her specifically for this deployment because there is no one else we trust when everything goes wrong. The weight of their testimony settled over the tarmac like a physical thing. Every person watching understood they were witnessing something rare, a reckoning, a moment when hidden truth became undeniable reality. Lattimore looked at Bryn again. I am deeply sorry. This base failed you in every possible way. Bryn's voice was quiet but clear. Apologies do not change what happened. They never do. What changes? Things is doing better next time, learning from failure, not repeating the same mistakes. She turned and climbed into the Black Hawk. The team followed. Kephart was last. He paused in the doorway and looked back at Lattimore. We do not operate without her, Kephart said. We do not deploy without her. We do not leave her behind. Your people judged her based on appearance. We judge her based on actions. You might want to remember that distinction. He climbed in and pulled the door shut. The pilot received the signal. The rotors began spinning faster. The sound intensified from a low rumble to a building roar. Dust rose in thick clouds. Personnel shielded their eyes and stepped back. Inside the lead helicopter, Bryn strapped into her seat. The interior was familiar in ways that went beyond physical recognition. The layout, the sounds, the smell of fuel and hydraulic fluid and desert dust. This was where she belonged, not in an administrative office being judged by people who had never left the wire. Here, with her team, moving toward missions that mattered. Novak sat across from her, securing his weapon. His eyes kept drifting to her leg. He had been doing that for 7 years, checking, making sure she was managing, making sure the injury had not progressed beyond her ability to compensate. Does it still hurt? He asked. Every single day. Good. Bryn looked at him. Good. Novak nodded. Means you remember what it cost. Means you remember what you did. Means you are still here to feel it. Thorne had taken Bryn's medical kit and was performing his ritual inspection, opening pouches, checking supplies, verifying that everything was properly stocked and positioned. He had been doing this since the day she returned to active duty after her injury. A way of contributing, a way of showing care without needing words. He finished the inspection and handed the kit back to her. You are good, widow. Thank you. Always. Capehart settled into the seat beside Bryn as the helicopter began to lift. He did not speak immediately, just sat there, looking out the window as Fort Meridian fell away beneath them. The tarmac, the buildings, the personnel growing smaller, the whole base shrinking to insignificance against the vast desert landscape. Thank you, Bryn said quietly, for coming to get me. Capehart turned to her. We were never going to leave you there. You understand that. I do now. You should have understood it always. We are a team. We do not abandon our people because someone else fails to recognize their value. The Black Hawk climbed higher. The other 3 helicopters fell into tight formation. They banked east, away from the base, toward coordinates that existed on no public maps. Bryn looked out the window one final time. Fort Meridian was just a grid of structures now, small, distant, already fading from relevance. She turned away and did not look back. On the tarmac below, the crowd slowly dispersed. Colonel Lattimore stood holding the tablet, staring at the sky where the helicopters had vanished. The file was still open. He scrolled back through it, reading more carefully now. Every detail, every commendation, every mission summary, building a complete picture of what his base had just lost. Major Drummond walked slowly back toward the medical building. Her steps were unsteady. She had spent 20 years in military medicine, had made thousands of assessments, had processed countless personnel through medical evaluations. And in 90 seconds this morning, she had made the worst professional judgment of her career. Not because she lacked information, but because she had failed to seek it. Lieutenant Caswell had already left the area. Within 2 hours, he would receive reassignment orders, temporary duty at a logistics depot 300 miles away. effective immediately. No explanation needed. Everyone would understand. Sergeant Howell remained at the security perimeter long after everyone else had dispersed. He stood staring at the empty sky. "Better luck with desk work, ma'am." His own words, spoken with casual dismissiveness to someone who had earned more respect than he would accumulate in his entire career. The memory of those words would stay with him, a reminder of the cost of careless judgment. In the base command center, Lattimore called an emergency meeting of senior staff. Within the hour, new protocols were being drafted. Comprehensive review of all personnel files before any medical determinations based on physical observation. Mandatory verification of operational history. Direct contact with previous commands for anyone with classified service records. The regulations would be named informally after this incident. The Harlow Protocols. A permanent reminder. In her office, Major Drummond opened her computer and pulled up Bryn's complete file. She now had access to everything: the classified annexes, the mission reports, the medical evaluations, the commendations and decorations. She read through it all, slowly, carefully, building the picture she should have built that morning before making any judgment. There were photographs embedded in the files. Bryn in full combat gear, years younger, standing with her original team, all of them smiling despite the harsh environment. Another photo showed her receiving a commendation. Another showed her training new medics, and one showed her in a hospital bed, leg heavily bandaged, giving a thumbs up to the camera despite obvious pain. Drummond stared at that last photo for a long time. Then she closed the file, opened a blank document, and began typing a letter that she knew would end her career at Fort Meridian, but was necessary anyway. A formal acknowledgement of failure, a recommendation for systemic change, and a personal apology that she knew Bryn would never read but needed to write regardless. The younger soldiers who had mocked Bryn near the motor pool were called into their platoon sergeant's office. The conversation was brief, direct. The sergeant explained exactly who the woman with the limp had been, what she had done, what she had sacrificed, and what their casual dismissal had revealed about their own lack of understanding. One of them asked if they could apologize directly. The sergeant shook his head. "She is gone, and even if she were not, your apology would mean nothing to her. What you can do is remember this, and make sure you never judge someone's capability by their appearance again. Understand, they understood." By evening, the story had spread through every unit on base, whispered in mess halls, discussed in barracks, passed from one shift to the next. The civilian contractor who was rejected, the 4 Black Hawks that came without clearance, the operators who confronted the base commander, the team that demanded their medic back, and the limp that told a story of courage that no one had bothered to read. The base would never forget. The story would become part of Fort Meridian's institutional memory, told to new arrivals, referenced in training, used as an example of what happens when judgment replaces knowledge, when assumption overrides verification, when surface appearance blinds people to deeper truth. 200 miles away, the 4 Black Hawks flew in formation through darkening sky. Inside the lead helicopter, the team had settled into the quiet rhythm of transit, equipment secured, mission parameters reviewed. Now there was only waiting, the familiar anticipation before deployment. Bryn sat with her eyes closed, but she was not resting. She was running through medical protocols, casualty scenarios, treatment priorities, the mental preparation she always did before operations, visualizing procedures, rehearsing responses, making sure her mind was as ready as her equipment. Keephart watched her from across the cabin. He recognized that expression, the slight furrow between her brows, the way her fingers occasionally moved as if practicing sutures. She was already in mission mode, already planning for every contingency. It was one of the things that made her exceptional, the absolute refusal to be unprepared. "Widow," he said quietly. She opened her eyes. "We have several hours before insertion. You should rest." "I will rest when we are on the ground." That is what you said 7 years ago, right before the ambush. Bryn's expression shifted. Something tightened around her eyes. "And if I had been resting instead of preparing, Novak would be dead. Thorne would be dead. Half the team would not have survived." Novak looked up from his weapon maintenance. "She is right. I was clinically dead for 45 seconds. No pulse, no respiration. She brought me back because she knew exactly what to do without hesitation. Thorn nodded. I was bleeding out from a severed artery. She found it and clamped it in under a minute, in a burning vehicle, while wounded, while taking fire. That is not luck. That is preparation. Aldrich spoke from his position, near the cargo door. We should tell Reeve and Koss the full story. They have heard pieces, but they should know everything if they are going to operate with us. The two younger operators straightened with interest. They had heard fragments, rumors, but never the complete account from the people who lived through it. Capehart looked at Bryn. Your call. She was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she nodded. They should understand. If they are deploying with this team, they need to know what that means. Novak shifted in his seat, his expression becoming distant as he reached back into memory. It was supposed to be a routine convoy movement. Intelligence said the route was clear. We were moving through a mountain pass, narrow terrain, limited options for maneuver. Thorn continued. We knew it was dangerous ground, perfect ambush territory. But the mission timeline was tight. We had no choice but to take the route. Capehart picked up the narrative. I was in the lead vehicle, Novak and Thorn were in the second Humvee with two other operators. Widow was in the third vehicle with support personnel, standard spacing, everything according to procedure. Bryn's voice was quiet when she spoke. The IED detonated at 11:47 local time. I heard the explosion, felt the pressure wave, watched their vehicle flip end over end and catch fire. Novak closed his eyes briefly. I remember the blast, being airborne. Then everything went black. When I came to, I was trapped. The vehicle was on fire. I could not move, could not breathe properly. I thought that was the end. Thorn touched the scar on his neck. I do not remember the explosion. I was unconscious, took shrapnel to the head and shoulder, bleeding heavily. Novak was trying to reach me, but he was pinned by the seat frame. Bryn continued. Enemy fire started immediately from both sides of the pass. Coordinated. They had been waiting for us. The IED was just to stop the convoy. They wanted to pin us down and eliminate us piece by piece. Kepart's jaw tightened. I ordered Widow to stay in her vehicle, take cover. We had other personnel who could attempt extraction. But she did not listen. I listened, Bryn said. I just made a different assessment. You had other personnel, but none with my medical training. And both men in that vehicle were dying. Novak looked at her. You ran across open ground toward a burning vehicle while rounds were hitting all around you. That is not different assessment. That is controlled insanity. Bryn met his eyes. You were my teammate, my responsibility. The choice was obvious. Thorn leaned forward. She reached our vehicle in under 30 seconds. Bullets impacting the ground, kicking up dust. She never slowed down, never hesitated, just ran straight into the kill zone like it was a training exercise. Bryn's voice remained steady. The Humvee was fully involved, ammunition starting to cook off. I calculated maybe 2 minutes before catastrophic failure. I forced the door. Open, Novak was conscious, but trapped. Thorn was in the back, unresponsive. Novak's voice was rough. She grabbed me and started pulling. The metal was cutting into my legs. The heat was incredible, but she did not stop, just kept pulling until I was clear. Then she went back for Thorn. And that is when you were hit, Kephart said quietly. Bryn touched her left thigh, the unconscious gesture she had made dozens of times. I was pulling Thorn from the back seat. The round came through the doorframe, shattered my femur. I went down hard. Reeve and Koss were completely motionless, listening with absolute attention. But you kept going, Aldrich said, despite the injury, despite the fire, despite everything. Bryn nodded. Thorn was still in the vehicle. I could not leave him. I crawled back, grabbed him, dragged him out. The vehicle exploded maybe 30 seconds after I cleared him from the blast radius. Thorn's voice was soft. I came to briefly and saw her. Blood everywhere. Bone, visible through her leg. But she was not treating herself. She was treating me and Novak. Bryn spoke matter-of-factly. I applied a hasty tourniquet to my own leg, then performed needle decompression on Thorn's collapsed lung, stabilized Novak's breathing. We had 3 other casualties from the ambush. I could not walk, so I crawled to each position. Capehart continued. The landing zone was too hot for medevac. We were pinned down. I called in air support, got coverage, created enough space for the birds to come in. But Widow refused to be loaded first, because 4 other people were in worse condition, Bryn said simply. I was conscious. They were not. Priority was clear. Novak shook his head. She stayed on the ground for 6 more hours, treated every casualty, managed the entire medical evacuation, did not get on a helicopter until every other wounded operator was secured and stable, Thorne added. When she finally collapsed, we thought we lost her. She had pushed too far. Lost too. Much blood. But even then she was giving instructions to the medics, telling them exactly what she needed, what medications, what to monitor. Keephart's voice carried weight. The doctors said she would never walk again without mechanical assistance, said the bone damage was too severe, too much tissue loss. They recommended medical discharge and permanent disability. Bryn looked at her leg. I disagreed with that assessment. Aldrich smiled slightly. She spent 8 months in rehabilitation, refused most pain medication because she said it impaired her judgment, worked through physical therapy like it was a combat operation, set goals, met them, exceeded them. Thorne continued. When she requalified for deployment, half the review board said it was impossible. The other half said it was inadvisable. She did it anyway. Because this matters, Bryn said. Because the team matters. Because walking with a limp is infinitely better than not walking at all. The cabin went quiet. Reeve and Koss looked at Bryn with something approaching reverence. The story they had heard whispered in fragments was real. The person sitting across from them had done everything claimed and more. Keifhart spoke into the silence. That is who Widowmaker 1 is. That is why we flew into Fort Meridian without clearance. That is why we confronted their commander. That is why we do not leave her behind. Ever. Novak nodded. She earned that limp saving lives. Anyone who sees it as weakness fundamentally misunderstands what they are looking at. It represents sacrifice, Thorne said. Courage, Aldrich added. Refusal to quit, Novak finished. Refusal to accept that injury meant the end. Refusal to let limitation define capability. Bryn looked at Reeve and Koss. You understand now why I disagreed with Major Drummond's assessment. Yes, ma'am, Reeve said quietly. Completely. Koss nodded. It is an honor to operate with you, ma'am. Bryn did not know how to respond to that. She settled for a small nod. The young operators seemed satisfied. The team settled back into the rhythm of flight, but the atmosphere had changed, heavier now, weighted with shared history and mutual understanding, the kind of bond that only forms between people who have survived impossible circumstances together. Hours passed. The sky darkened completely. Stars appeared in brilliant profusion across the desert night. Inside the cabin, individual team members dozed or maintained equipment or simply sat with their thoughts, preparing mentally for what lay ahead. Bryn closed her eyes again, let herself drift into a state between waking and sleeping, not true rest, but enough to let her body recover slightly. Her leg throbbed with persistent pain, 7 years of constant ache. But the pain was a reminder. She was still here, still operational, still capable of doing the work that mattered most. The helicopters descended toward a remote staging area as dawn approached, a compound that existed on no public maps. Support. Personnel moved with practiced efficiency. Vehicles positioned, equipment staged. This was the edge of the operational envelope. Beyond this point, the team would be alone. The Black Hawks touched down in sequence. The team disembarked into cool morning air. Bryn stepped onto hard-packed dirt and felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before every mission, the sharpening of focus, the heightening of awareness, the transition from person to operator. A mission commander approached, weathered face, eyes that had seen too much. He nodded to Keifhart, then looked at Bryn with genuine respect. Widowmaker 1. Good to have you in the field. Good to be here, sir. He gestured toward an operations tent. Final briefing in 10 minutes. Wheels up in 30. Understood. The team moved to the tent. Inside, tactical maps covered every surface. Satellite imagery. Route analysis. Threat assessments. Kephart reviewed final mission parameters with the commander. Bryn studied medical. Evacuation routes, calculated response times, identified potential casualty collection points, planning for scenarios that everyone hoped would not occur, but that she needed to be ready for, regardless. The briefing was efficient. No wasted words. The mission was high-risk insertion into hostile territory. Objectives were clear. Timeline was unforgiving. Success was not guaranteed. But the team had done harder operations before. When they emerged from the tent, the sun had fully risen. The compound was active with final preparations. Helicopters being prepped, weapons being loaded, the controlled chaos of military operations at their finest. Bryn performed a final check of her medical kit. Supplies, medications, instruments, everything positioned exactly where muscle memory could find it in darkness or chaos. She had done this hundreds of times. The ritual never changed, the importance never diminished. Kefart walked over. Ready? Always. Still lying. She smiled. Probably. They moved. To the staging area. Different helicopters this time. Smaller, configured for stealth insertion rather than transport. The team loaded with practiced efficiency. Bryn secured her position, set her medical kit within immediate reach, the familiar pre-mission routine. The helicopters lifted off, flying low, following terrain contours that kept them below radar coverage. The landscape blurred beneath them, mountains, valleys, dry riverbeds, terrain that would conceal their approach until the last possible moment. Bryn watched through the window, felt the familiar acceleration of her heartbeat, the chemical surge that prepared her body for extreme demands. She had learned to channel that response, use it, let it sharpen her rather than overwhelm her. Her leg ached from the morning's movement. She adjusted her position slightly, found an angle that reduced the pressure. The pain decreased but never fully disappeared. It would be there during the insertion, during the mission, during extraction. A constant companion, but also a constant reminder of why she was here, what she had proven, what she continued to prove every single day. Kefart caught her eye, gave a small nod. She returned it. No words needed. They had operated together too long, understood each other too completely. Communication happened in glances and gestures. The helicopters banked hard, descended into a narrow canyon. Walls rose on either side. The insertion point was ahead. 30 seconds, 20, 10. The birds flared, touched down with barely a jolt. The team was out instantly, moving fast, weapons up. Formation tight. The helicopters lifted immediately, gone in seconds, leaving only dust and the weight of isolation. Bryn was fifth in the formation. Her limp was visible but irrelevant. She moved with the team, kept position, maintained awareness. The injury was part of her, not a limitation, just reality, like breathing, like bleeding, like fighting. They moved through hostile terrain with absolute silence, hand signals only. Every step calculated. This was what they trained for, what they lived for. The sharp edge where skill and judgment meant survival. The mission unfolded over hours, details that would remain classified, objectives achieved through precision and teamwork, threats neutralized, intel gathered, the kind of work that happened in shadows and was never acknowledged publicly. 4 hours into the operation, contact, brief but intense. Bryn stayed with the wounded operator while the team secured the perimeter. Shrapnel wound to the shoulder, serious but manageable. She worked quickly, controlled the bleeding, administered medication, stabilized the injury, got him back in operational status within 15 minutes. The team moved on, no stops, no delays. Mission timeline did not allow for extended medical treatment. That would happen at extraction. Right now, she kept people moving, kept them fighting, kept them alive. They reached the extraction point as the sun began its descent. The helicopters appeared exactly on schedule. Perfect coordination. The team loaded, equipment secured, wounded operator stable, mission complete. As the helicopters climbed away from the hostile zone, Bryn allowed herself to breathe fully for the first time in hours. The immediate danger had passed. They were airborne, heading home. She had done her job, kept her people alive, honored the commitment that defined her more than any injury ever could. Novak was across the cabin, grinning despite exhaustion. Clean extraction, minimal casualties. Good work, Widow. Thorne nodded agreement. Martinez is stable because of you. That shoulder wound could have been catastrophic. Bryn shrugged. It was straightforward trauma. Anyone with proper training could have handled it. But you handled it, Kephart said. Under fire, in 12 minutes. That is why you were here. The helicopters flew back toward the staging compound. The mission was over. The team was intact. Success, measured not in glory, but in everyone coming home alive. They landed at the compound as darkness fell. Debriefing was thorough, mission parameters reviewed, lessons documented, improvements identified. Then the team dispersed, some to equipment maintenance, some to rest, all to the routines that followed successful operations. Bryn found a quiet corner and sat down carefully. Her leg was screaming now. Hours of movement, hours of stress. The pain that she had suppressed during the mission came flooding back with intensity. She closed her eyes, focused on breathing. The pain would recede. It always did. Eventually. Kephart sat down beside her. You need that leg looked at. It will keep. Widow. She opened her eyes. I have managed this pain for 7 years. I can handle another few hours, still as stubborn as ever, still as realistic as ever. He did not argue, just sat there. Silent companionship from someone who understood that sometimes presence mattered more than words. After a while, Bryn spoke. Thank you for what you did at Fort Meridian. We were never going to leave you there. You know that. I know. But thank you anyway. They sat in comfortable silence. Around them, the compound continued its operations. Personnel moving, equipment being serviced, the perpetual rhythms of military infrastructure. Eventually, Bryn stood. Time to get this leg examined before you make it an order. Kephart smiled. Too late. I already decided. She walked toward the medical tent. The limp was pronounced now. No energy left to compensate, no need to hide it. She was among people who measured her by actions, not appearance. People who understood that capability and perfection were not synonyms. The medic examined her leg, checked range of motion, applied ice to reduce inflammation, gave her anti-inflammatory medication, standard post-mission care, necessary maintenance. You push yourself hard, the medic observed. The mission requires it. That leg needs rest eventually. It will get rest when I retire. Until then, it needs to work. The medic shook his head but did not argue. He finished treatment and released her. Bryn walked back to her assigned quarters. Small room, simple cot. Everything she needed and nothing she did not. She lay down and closed her eyes. The mission was complete. The team was safe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new deployments, new opportunities to prove that commitment overcame limitation. That capability transcended appearance. That true strength was measured not by perfection, but by perseverance. Her leg ached, would ache tomorrow, would ache for the rest of her life. But that was acceptable. The price paid. The cost understood. And she had never regretted the choice made 7 years ago in a burning vehicle under enemy fire, when she refused evacuation and kept fighting because her teammates needed her. At Fort Meridian, 200 miles away, the base was settling into evening routines. But the day's events had fundamentally changed the institution. In Colonel Lattimore's office, new protocols were being finalized. Comprehensive personnel review procedures, mandatory operational history verification, direct command consultation for any medical rejections of personnel with classified service records. The protocols would be implemented immediately, and they would be known informally as the Harlow Protocols. A permanent reminder of the cost of judgment without knowledge, a testament to learning from catastrophic failure. In her quarters, Major Drummond sat at her desk. A letter of resignation lay before her, unfinished. She had spent hours trying to find words adequate to express both acknowledgement of failure and commitment to preventing recurrence. There were no perfect words, but the letter had to be written anyway. She pulled up Bryn's file one final time, read through the complete operational history, the missions, the commendations, the medical evaluations, the testimonials from commanders who praised her skill and dedication. Building the picture she should have built before making any judgment that morning. There was a photograph near the end of the file, Bryn in a hospital bed, leg heavily bandaged, giving a thumbs up despite obvious pain. The caption read, 3 days post-surgery, already planning return to duty. That single image captured everything Drummond had failed to see: determination, resilience, absolute refusal to let injury define capability. Drummond closed the file, returned to her resignation letter, and continued writing. Across the base, the story continued to spread, discussed in mess halls, debated in barracks, analyzed in offices. The civilian contractor rejected in minutes, the 4 Black Hawks that came without authorization, the operators who demanded their medic back, the team that proved loyalty meant more than protocol. The story would become legend at Fort Meridian, told to new arrivals, referenced in training, used as a case study in leadership courses, a permanent part of institutional memory, the day the base learned that respect is earned through sacrifice, not granted through appearance. And somewhere in the night, at a remote compound that existed on no maps, Bryn Harlow slept the sleep of exhausted warriors who had given everything and somehow found strength to give more, surrounded by teammates who would breach any protocol to bring her home, who measured her not by her limp, but by the lives she had saved earning it. Morning would come, new missions would follow, and she would be ready. Because that was who she was. Widowmaker 1. The medic who walked with a limp and moved mountains anyway. The operator who proved every day that true capability transcends physical form. The person who demonstrated that strength is measured not by perfection, but by the refusal to surrender. Her story was not unique. There were others like her everywhere, in every profession, every field, every corner of human endeavor. People carrying wounds from battles fought in service to something greater. People judged by appearance and vindicated by action. People who proved that limitation is often just perspective waiting to be changed. If you know someone like that, honor them, not with words but with recognition, with understanding that their scars tell stories worth hearing, that their limitations often mark where their greatest strengths began, that their perseverance despite pain represents courage in its purest form. And if you are that person, know this: your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. Your capability is not limited by those who cannot imagine it. Your strength is proven not through perfection, but through perseverance, through choosing to move forward when everything says stop, through commitment to purpose despite cost. That is what Bryn Harlow represents, what her team understands, what Fort Meridian learned too late to matter to her, but just in time to change how they see everyone who follows. Respect is not given, it is recognized. And sometimes it arrives in 4 Black Hawks demanding the return of someone extraordinary whom the world mistook for ordinary. If you have ever witnessed that moment when someone underestimated becomes undeniable, share it below. And if you understand that true strength often walks with uneven steps because it has already carried impossible weight, stay with us. Subscribe if you believe that the deepest scars tell the most important stories, because those stories deserve to be heard, remembered, and honored.